Welcome everybody. We're doing another one. And there goes my dog scratching at the door. When I tell y'all, I have not cried this much researching an artist. I was a puddle. I love Freddie Mercury. I love Queen. And it was so much fun. But I got super emotional through the whole thing. This literally, again, I say it every time, could have been hours and hours and hours of stuff, but I have to squeeze a life down into, I try to make it under an hour. It might run a little long, I don't know until I edit it, but let's go ahead, let's get into it. Also, can we appreciate my new shirt? I love it. So cute. Also, trigger warnings. We are going to talk about AIDS, HIV, and death. Just want to let you know that ahead of time. Also, this is just information I've compiled from different sources online, documentaries, articles, biographies, and I do these with all the love and utmost respect I have. So let's just get into it. I look crazy. I don't know what's happening with my hair today. I need a haircut, but we're just not going to talk about it. Also, my skin is having a moment. This is what happens when I use products with coconut in them. Brows are on, eye base is on, and we're gonna get started. And I'm doing a look I saw them do on Freddie for a photo shoot. It's kind of a rainbow look, which I thought would be apropos. So it's gonna get a little nuts before it finally looks good. So Freddie Mercury was born Faro Balsara on September 5th, 1946 in Zanzibar. His birth actually fell on the Parsi New Year's Day that year. And his mother gave him the name Pharaoh because it was fashionable at the time. His mother said that as a child, he began singing very early on. He liked Indian, folk, English. He loved all types of music, but especially Western music. Mama Mercury said that they would go to functions and parties, and Freddie would take great pride in singing for all their friends and family. And even early on, Freddie had a zest for life. They grew up in a very close-knit Parsi community, and his family practiced Zoroastrianism, and he and his sister Kashmira were very, very close. He and Cash, as she was called, and their cousins were fascinated with fashion magazines, although Cash said by the time they would get them, they were very much outdated. But she said Freddie was a wonderful big brother. On Valentine's Day 1954, at age 8 years old, Freddie was sent to study at St. Peter's boarding school near Bombay. It was a British style boarding school. He was good at pretty much anything he tried: sports, music, art, and this is where he would become known as Freddie, even though they did have another nickname for him, which was Bucky, and this was due to his teeth. He had lots of interests when he was in school, and one of his teachers asked him if he would be interested in oil painting, which he was, and he actually became a very good artist. He sketched, he painted, and he was very, very talented at that as well. At 12 years old, he formed his first band with his schoolmates called the Hectics, and they were so adorable. His bandmates said that Western pop was the only thing he wanted to play, though, and they would cover songs and put on concerts for their school. Also, can we talk about how cute these earrings are? I like them. They're different. Now, he did have a love interest, but being that it was an all-boys school, there wasn't much opportunity to date. However, at church, the girls were mixed with the boys, and Freddie would pass love notes to his love interest. Her name was Geeta, and evidently he was enamored with her, but so were all the boys. In the spring of 1964, Freddie and his family fled from Zanzibar to escape the violence of the revolution against the Sultan of Zanzibar, and his mom said it was an incredibly scary time for the family, especially having children. So they fled to England and they settled in Feltham at 22 Gladstone Avenue. And Freddie was so excited to move. And his mom said he was very helpful and had such a good outlook about moving, and that he really helped the family kind of keep morale up at this time. But Freddie would stand out a little bit in England. He came there wearing this slicked back black pompadour, and at the time, of course, the shaggy hair was in. It was England in the days of the Beatles. So he begged his mom to let him grow out his hair, and of course she did, because all the boys were doing it. Now, he would meet the guys from Queen while studying in England. After first studying at Isleworth Polytechnic in West London, he studied graphic art at Ealing Art College, and that is where he met Roger Taylor and Brian May. And Ealing had a reputation for producing amazing artists like Pete Townsend and Ronnie Wood. But Roger was there studying to be a dentist, of all things. And Brian May was actually a physics major. The guys from Queen were very, very, very intelligent. And again, while here, he would create some amazing art. And I'll put some of those pictures in here. He was awesome. And I'm sure some of these sketches are worth big bucks today. He also designed some really beautiful clothing. And his mom said that one time she had these linen English tablecloths, and Freddie was going out in London, and he decided to take her tablecloths and make a pattern, cut it out, and sew a little shirt. Mama was highly annoyed. I think I would be too. So he played in a few bands, but nothing too serious. And it was clear he was talented, but Brian May has said he didn't think he was, he just didn't think he was very serious about music, even though he was clearly good at it. And Brian said at Freddie's core, he was very kind, very gentle, and actually very, very shy. And people found that interesting, that he had this larger-than-life personality on stage, but off stage he was actually very, very shy. And he said it, even at this stage, Freddie was kind of cloaking himself in this persona. So Brian said that they used to practice their harmonies in the gents' toilet because it had good acoustics. And here he could see Freddie had a good voice, and because he was such a character, they knew he was a showman. But they didn't know if he had the technical ability, so to speak, which now is kind of laughable to think about, but back then, they just weren't sure. And he was in a band then called Wreckage. He was very camp even then. And that is where he was given the nickname The Old Queen, which would come into play later for obvious reasons. But at the time, Brian and Roger had a band called Smile. And it was the band that would eventually become Queen. It was Brian, Roger, and Tim Staffel. And at this time, Freddie was just their friend, and he would come to shows and give them ideas and, throw out his opinion on what they should do for costumes and for their look and for their sound. But Tim did not like the direction it was taking, and so he decided to bow out and move along and do something a little different. And Freddie offered to sing, so Brian and Roger agreed. And Freddie had written a song called Fairy King. And in the song, one of the lines is, "Oh, Mother Mercury," or "Look what they done to me." And there was this whole story to the song. And he told the guys, "I'm going to become Mercury." And they were like, "Oh yeah, okay, whatever." But he actually legally changed his name to Mercury. And Brian said he thinks changing his name helped him become the person that he wanted to be. Now, while in Kensington, there was a hub of kind of underground fashion at this time, and this is where Freddie would meet who he called the love of his life, Mary Austin. And it was actually Brian who was dating Mary first. And Brian went out with her on a few dates, but it was nothing really serious. And so Freddie would talk about Mary, and Brian could see he was into her. And so he said he would introduce them because they weren't really a thing. So he introduced Freddie, but it would take him 5 months to ask her out. But when he finally did, they would become inseparable. And actually, they would move in together 5 months later after dating. And Brian said Freddie had dated other girls before, but his heart was never in it. But with Mary it was, and he said they were so cute together, and he was extremely sweet to her. He loved her, and she took care of him. Now, Queen would spend a few years honing their act, and then in 1973, armed with their first record deal, they set out on a tour as the opening act for Mott the Hoople. And I had never heard of that band before, but apparently they were a big deal. And I may have heard their songs, but I wasn't familiar off the bat. Sorry if my lighting changed. I'm having issues with a couple of my lights, guys, so bear with me. So by 1974, Queen had 2 albums under their belt and a cult following, but they hadn't really made it yet. But David Bowie, and these videos are quickly becoming 6 degrees of David Bowie. David Bowie was set to appear on Top of the Pops, but his album, the video for his album Rebel Rebel wasn't finished yet. So they needed someone like last minute, get here now type of situation. And for those that don't know, Top of the Pops was kind of like Britain's American Bandstand, but as luck would have it, Queen was available, and this would finally be their breakout. Pro tip, if you need to clean up under your eyes and you've already done your primer, you can use this to clean it up, or your sunscreen if you've already done your sunscreen. So this would be their breakout. Their follow-up was a hit, and they again would perform on Top of the Pops, and they performed Killer Queen. We're going to try an oldie, the LA Girl Pro Mat. So in autumn 1975, Queen had gained a reputation for being a little unorthodox, and it wasn't just Freddie's fashion choices, it was their style of rock too. And Zandra Rhodes was Freddie's costume designer. She also designed for Princess Diana, and together she and Freddie came up with the costumes that would help define Freddie's look. And y'all look at this woman and tell me this is not me in like 20, 25 years. So Freddie writes Bohemian Rhapsody during this time, and producers said this is going to either be a catastrophic failure or the greatest rock song of all time. And I think most would agree it was the latter. Oh, this is bad. This is too pale. For as pale as I am, it's still too pale. It's going with NARS, Mont Blanc. Now, the record company was worried about Bohemian Rhapsody because they were worried that a 6-minute song would not get airtime on radio. As we have talked about in a couple other episodes of Makeup and Music, radio stations don't like really long songs. They like to keep them between 3 and 4 minutes. But if you haven't seen those, check out my other videos. We've done David Bowie, Tina Turner, Prince was my last one. And I hope to keep making these. But in the month of June, we had to do Freddie. I still look really pale. We'll fix it with bronzer. So yeah, the record company pushed back on the song, but Queen didn't give in. And radio stations did say that it was far too long for them to play. But there was actually this maverick disc jockey named Kenny Edwards who absolutely latched onto this song, thought it was the greatest thing in the world, and was determined to make it a hit. And he would actually play it back to back. He would be like, oops, I hit the wrong button. And halfway through their tour with Mott the Hoople, Queen had themselves a #1. So all these wonderful things are happening, but Mary could see that something was off with Freddie. She knew him better than absolutely anyone, and she could just tell he was struggling with something. It was not like him at all to be worried or down. You know, even when he would make the best of the situation. They were best friends as well as lovers, and she could tell something was going on, and she could see he was struggling. And Mary had her assumptions, and in December of 1976, the year and month of my birth, Freddie finally came to her and told her that he had been seeing David Mims, who was a record executive from Elektra Records, and she was actually relieved in a way because her assumptions were correct, and Mary, she just wanted him to be happy, and she was really, really happy that he could be honest with her, but even more than that, that he could be honest with himself. And she said that after they talked, she watched him return to himself, and this made her so incredibly happy. And Freddie had no idea, you know, when he went to her to tell her all this, just how incredibly supportive she was going to be. To hear her talk about it is pretty awesome. She was gonna support him no matter what. Freddie loved her so much for this. He was truly grateful that this was how she took the news. And they both felt that the truth was better for the both of them, obviously. But even till the end, Freddie would never label himself or his sexuality, and I think a lot of that had to do with the time that they were living in, because even now it's hard. So Freddie and Mary would remain best friends, with Freddie referring to her as his only true friend. And in a 1985 interview, he said of her, "All my lovers asked me why they couldn't replace Mary, but it's simply impossible. The only friend I've got is Mary, and I don't want anybody else. To me, she was my common-law wife, and to me it was a marriage. We believe in each other, and that's enough for me." And Freddie was also the godfather of her oldest son, Richard. Now, by 1977, Queen began filling stadiums. Now, Freddie was famous for throwing the best parties, and they would sometimes turn into days or weeks. And they would have drag shows and burlesque at these parties. Freddie had a myriad of interests, and they definitely played out at the parties. Also in 1979, the Royal Ballet was trying to attract a different, younger crowd, so they collabed with Freddie, and he did a full-on ballet number while singing. Pink does it on silks, but Freddie did it first. Now, while punk was trying to squeeze out mainstream rock, Queen kept giving fans what they loved and what they wanted. And as Freddie found more personal freedom, he also found more freedom in his music and in his clothes. I think he began to express himself even more. Freddie spent a lot of time a part of the London gay scene, as well as New York City when he lived there. And he ran into and befriended Glenn Hughes. He was a member of the Village People. If you'll remember him as the biker. And Glenn very much inspired Freddie's leather period. They were fun. So as Freddie shifted, the band also shifted. And bassist John Deacon wrote Another One Bites the Dust, and they diversified a little bit with this one and kind of dipped their toe into disco. But the funny thing is, even though it was a very disco type of song, they still managed to sound like Queen, and I think they had a gift of doing that. Now, when the band released the video for I Wanna Break Free, it was extremely camp, and all the guys dressed in drag for it. And it caused a stir, especially in America, but they were just having fun, and Queen never, ever could have been accused of taking themselves too seriously. Despite all that, they said they had a blast filming it, and people assumed that it was Freddie's idea, but actually it was Roger. And can we take a moment to appreciate Roger in this picture? He looks fabulous. Trixie Mattel who? So in 1981, since the US had their panties in a bunch about the video, ooh, I forgot how pigmented this blush is. We will tone that down. Oh, this is some clownery. Anyway, they set their sights on South America, and they were a little nervous about this, but they were received by thousands upon thousands of adoring fans, and they filled every stadium they went to in South America. They had definitely solidified their place as the world's greatest stadium rockers, but they also kind of had a reputation for their antics backstage. There's some crazy stories. You'll have to look them up. I can't tell them here. But the funny thing is about it, they never made headlines for, doing anything bad. They were just having fun. And they managed to keep things fairly discreet. So they pretty much stayed out of the headlines. However, when they were scheduled to play at a tourist area in Sun City, which is in South Africa, playing there broke a UN boycott and also a musicians union boycott, and they would actually get a lot of flack for this, and they would actually be accused of supporting apartheid, which they did not, but in reality they were told that they would be playing to a mixed audience. It was not. It was the tourist area where they were playing. But there was a huge mix-up, and that would kind of loom over them for a long time. But they have all vehemently denied it. They said it was a huge mistake. Who knows? But they denied, obviously, supporting apartheid. And now, of course, say it was a huge mistake to go and do the concerts. So after several years of the partying, Freddie decided it was time to settle down. And that's when he met Irish-born hairdresser Jim Hutton, and Jim would wind up being his partner for the rest of his life. But when asked about whether he was gay or not, Freddie would usually just tell people to get bent. I mean, it was obvious from his personal life that he had relationships with both men and women, and I think people wanted him to label it. But I think that we need to remember that up until 1967, homosexuality was actually illegal in England. And so that had to be so difficult. And for the first few years, Jim would keep his distance publicly. But eventually, as times changed, they became more open about it. So by the mid-80s, things were slowing down for Queen. They had toured and partied relentlessly for years and years. And some downtime was very much needed. And just when people started wondering if that was it for Queen, they were done, whether they were washed up, just old rockers settling down to chill in their last days. And by today's standards, they're not even that old. They're like a little bit younger than me at this point. But just when people are starting to think that, at 6:41 on the 13th of July, 1985, they reminded everyone that Queen still reigns supreme. In the Annals of Rock, Freddie and Queen's performance at Live Aid would go down as one of, if not possibly, the greatest shows of all time. And if you've never seen that, I highly recommend it. It's a 17-minute medley of all their hits. And this show reminded Queen how much they loved playing together, how good they really are, and they would actually decide to start playing again. Now, Freddie's GP had called Mary, telling her that they needed to speak with him and that it was very important. And she said she'd relay the message, but after a while they called back and said they still hadn't heard from him. I think Freddie knew what they were going to say. Finally, they revealed to her why they needed to speak to him. you cannot do that today. That would be a HIPAA violation big time. But they revealed to her why they needed to give him a call. And she said when she got that call, she felt her heart immediately break. Freddie claims that it was 1985, right before the Live Aid performance, when he was diagnosed with HIV, but it's actually theorized in a biography, or in the biography Somebody to Love, that it was actually in 1981 when he contracted the virus. Queen had appeared on SNL, Saturday Night Live, and at the time he was having severe flu-like symptoms. And as we know, that can be an indicator of contraction of HIV. So it's possible. But back then, a lot of people did not find out that they were HIV positive until it had actually turned into AIDS, because you don't really have any symptoms other than the initial symptoms at contraction. Either way, he wanted to keep it to himself, and he only began telling others when he could no longer hide it. Jim said that Freddie told him he understood if he wanted to leave, but Jim just told him, "Don't be silly, I'm not going anywhere." Jim would also later be HIV positive, and he just stuck right there with him through it all. Well, Freddie chose a particular moment to tell those in his life. They said after he told them, he did not want to talk about it after that. That was it. He didn't want to dwell on it, and he wanted to live out the rest of his life the way he wanted to, and the way he'd always lived life, which was just enjoying it. So the performance at Live Aid again reminded the guys how much they love being Queen, so they set out on a world tour. Sadly, this would be their final tour together. And in 1987, Freddie embarked on a solo career, and his first endeavor was a collaboration with the female Pavarotti, Montserrat Caballé. She was one of his idols, and when they met, they stayed up all night playing piano and singing together, and they actually developed an amazing friendship after this night. Now, despite the joy of working with his idol, he had increasingly become more and more unwell. He had maybe been in a little bit of denial, according to some people, but that's understandable. And he pulled back a little. He didn't want people to see him, especially the people he loved. He didn't want people to see him deteriorating. And I think a lot of us would feel the same way. And I think he especially wanted to, sorry, I'm doing my lips, wanted to spare his family from the media. And he would literally pull himself off his sickbed to record and to just keep living. Because in true Freddie fashion, he was going to make the most of the time he had. In 1990, when Freddie appeared at the Brit Awards, it was obvious something was wrong, and it would actually be the last time he would be seen in public. And even while frail, Brian May said that Freddie insisted on recording. Brian said Freddie told him, "Write me stuff, Brian. I know I don't have long. Keep writing me words. Keep giving me songs. I will sing them. I want to sing." Whew. Brian said he could barely stand up. Oh my gosh. But he would prop himself up on the mixing desk and have his mic there. And he said for as much pain and suffering his body was enduring, his voice was perfect. I'm going to collect myself, put on some lashes, and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. These may be wonky, but it's a tough one to get through. So Freddie knew he would have to give a statement eventually. He couldn't keep it forever. He had become very reclusive again the last 2 years. Again, simply he wanted to keep it out of the media. He didn't want it to affect his family and friends. He didn't want there to be a media circus. But he knew he was going to have to give a statement eventually. So one Saturday night, he released a statement. And it read as follows. "Following enormous conjecture in the press, I wish to confirm that I have tested HIV positive and have AIDS," he announced. "I felt it correct to keep this information private in order to protect the privacy of those around me. However, the time has now come for my friends and fans around the world to know the truth. And I hope everyone will join me, my doctors, and all those worldwide in the fight against this terrible disease. And just 24 hours later, he would take his last breath. Freddie died at the age of 45. To hear the media talk about his last days, from what I read, it seemed a completely different story than the one his friends and family told. And I'm gonna go with the one his friends and family told. In his last days, he was surrounded by those he loved. Some just sat with him, some played Scrabble with him. Mary and his partner Jim and Dave Clark of the Dave Clark Five were there with him, and they would sit for hours with him. Mary said once he asked her to put on a tape of one of his concerts, and they watched the whole thing through together. And when it ended, he looked at her and he said, I was handsome then, wasn't I? And she said, you're still handsome. So he was surrounded by the people that loved him, truly, and the ones he loved. He gave the statement on Saturday. Then on Sunday, the 24th of November, 1991, his breathing changed and he lost consciousness. And the doctor came by and let them know it could be now, or it could be a few more days, or he could come out of it. But Jim said not too long after that, he and Dave were going to change his clothes. Dave had been sitting with him, and Jim noticed that he was no longer breathing, and the first thing he said was, he's gone, phone Mary. He did die at home in Garden Lodge in Kensington, which was his home, and his cause of death was pneumonia resulting from AIDS. He was cremated, and a service of 35 of his closest friends and family were there, including Elton John and the members of Queen. His coffin was brought in to the sounds of Aretha Franklin's Take My Hand, Precious Lord, and You've Got a Friend. The ashes were given to Mary, and Mary said one day after Sunday lunch, he said, I know exactly where I want you to put me, but no one is to know. I don't want to be dug up. I just want to rest in peace. So only Mary knows where they are, and she said she will never reveal where they are as per Freddie's wishes. Now, most of Freddie's wealth had been spent during his life or donated to charity, but his estate was still valued at around $8 million, and that was divvied up between his sister, his family, and 3 of his friends, and his partner Jim. And Mary was given 50% of all privately owned shares, and she was also given his Garden Lodge, his home in Kensington. 5 months after his passing, the remaining members of Queen assembled all the pop and rock royalty, and it was the biggest thing since Live Aid, and they put on a tribute to Freddie and AIDS awareness concert. And there's a moment when George Michael sings Somebody to Love, and you also have to look that up. That's an amazing, amazing performance. And that's somebody else who I'm going to have to do a video on, is George Michael. 10 years after, a show based on Freddie would debut on the West End and become a massive success and run for years. And then 10 years after that, Adam Lambert would join Queen to revive Day and Freddie's songs, and he does an amazing job as well. In 2018, the film Bohemian Rhapsody premiered, and while it was criticized for its factual inaccuracies, Rami Malek provided a scarily accurate depiction of Freddie. Even 30 years after his death, Freddie and his music are still relevant. And his legacy is not only his voice, but the people that he loved so well and that loved him. Friends say he just radiated love. And when asked how he wanted to be remembered, he simply said, I'd just like to be remembered that I left somebody happy. And I think we can all agree he very, very much accomplished that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Again, I say it every time, but I could do hours and hours and hours of these. There's so much to a person's life, and trying to condense it down in an hour is super hard. But I do my best, and I try to do it with all the love that I have for these artists. So if you like these, please leave me some more recommendations below. it would help me out. And also, if you like and leave a comment, share, that would help me out too. Don't forget to subscribe. If you're new, I appreciate you taking the time to watch this to the end, guys. And yeah, thank you so much for spending time with me. I love you guys. I'll see you next time. Bye.